The second time I watched Vivian Xiao walk toward the glass doors of the International Fellows Interview Hall, her lips were moving silently, but not because she was praying. Vivian never prayed unless the room had cameras. She was rehearsing the 3 lines she had stolen from memory before I shut my laptop in her face that morning. Language is not just a bridge. It is a responsibility. Translation is the ethics of being understood. They were good lines. I knew they were good because I wrote them in the first life while she sat on my bed eating my emergency chocolate and saying, "Maya, make it sound like me, but smarter." In that life, I was stupid enough to smile and say, "Of course." In this life, I stood at the end of the corridor with my own folder tucked under one arm, my phone off, my face calm, and watched her mouth fall apart around words she had never earned. The panel waited behind those doors. 2 professors from the university, 1 retired diplomat, 1 medical NGO director from Geneva, and 1 woman from the scholarship board who had once written a paper on ethical interpretation in refugee health clinics. Vivian had written fluent English and French on her application because she had heard me practicing both in the dorm bathroom. She had written translated community interviews independently because she had seen the files on my desk. She had written, experienced in live cross-cultural communication because she could say bonjour without choking. In the first life, I turned those lies into a polished interview script, drilled her pronunciation until midnight, wrote backup answers, translated her personal statement, and even recorded voice notes for her to imitate while she slept. She went into that room sounding like a miracle. She came out holding the fellowship I needed to change my life, then turned around and told everyone I had begged her for money to leak the panel questions. This time, when she spun back and hissed, "Maya, send me the final translation now," I only looked at the red interview badge pinned crookedly to her blazer and said, "No, I'm done translating your lies." Here is the part nobody understands unless they have been betrayed by someone who called them bestie in public and servant in private. The betrayal is not a lightning strike. It is a slow leak. It starts with borrowing 1 lecture note, 1 jacket, 1 phrase, 1 apology you did not owe. Vivian and I had met in our first year at Northbridge University when she dropped her phone into a cafeteria bin and screamed like a surgeon had lost a kidney. I was the girl who reached into the rubbish without complaining because I had grown up in a house where you fix things before you asked whether they were disgusting. She hugged me after that, perfume and tears and expensive wool pressed against my secondhand sweater, and announced to the entire cafeteria, "Maya saved my life." I laughed, embarrassed, because when rich girls exaggerate gratitude, it sounds like affection. By second semester, she was borrowing my notes. By third, she was borrowing my words. By fourth, she was borrowing my story. My mother cleaned offices at night. My father had disappeared into a gambling debt before I was old enough to hate him properly, and I had learned English through subtitles, French through library CDs, and medical terminology by translating clinic brochures for aunties who were too frightened to sign consent forms they could not read. Vivian had learned presentation skills through private coaching and fearlessness bought by people who never wondered how rent was paid. Together, we looked like an inspiring pair, the hardworking scholarship student and the dazzling social butterfly who brought her into rooms she could never enter alone. Alone, we were something uglier. Vivian collected useful people the way other girls collected earrings, and I became her favorite pair because I matched everything. The first life ended on a wet Tuesday in November with my cheek against cold pavement and the taste of blood behind my teeth, but it began falling apart months earlier inside that same interview hall. The International Fellows Program was the kind of opportunity universities wrote press releases about. 12 students across the country would spend a year rotating through global health organizations, policy institutes, and translation research centers. The program paid housing, flights, living costs, tuition credit, and a stipend so large I stared at the number until it blurred. More than that, it offered a recommendation letter from the board, which meant a bridge out of Northbridge and into the life I had been building one sleepless night at a time. I wanted the fellowship because I had actually done the work. I had translated domestic violence information leaflets at a community clinic, interpreted for elderly migrants at immunization sessions, and spent my weekends building a tiny glossary of culturally sensitive medical phrases because the official documents always sounded like machines talking to frightened humans. Vivian wanted the fellowship because the program brochure looked good on her mother's coffee table. She found out I was applying when she saw the draft of my personal statement on my screen, and the next day she appeared beside my bed with strawberry milk, 2 croissants, and eyes shining with manufactured panic. "I applied too," she whispered, as if confessing a murder. "Maya, don't be mad. I didn't know you cared that much." I should have heard the blade under that softness. Instead, I told her it was fine. She did not ask for help immediately. That was Vivian's genius. She began with helpless little storms. First, she cried over the English portion of the application, saying she knew what she wanted to express, but not how to sound sincere. Then she sent me a paragraph at 1 a.m. with 20 heart emojis and the words, "Just check grammar?" Then she said the French volunteer section was basically impossible because she had only taken French in high school and her tutor had been useless. Then she sat behind me in the library and sighed every 90 seconds until I took out my headphones. By the time the interview invitations arrived, her application had my fingerprints all over it and my name nowhere. Still, I told myself that helping her did not diminish me. This is the lie generous girls are trained to swallow, that there is enough light for everyone, even when someone else is quietly unscrewing your bulb. 2 days before the final interview, Vivian appeared in our dorm room with her mascara streaked, her hair unwashed for theatrical realism, and her hands shaking around a printed schedule. "They added a panel section," she said. "Live questions. Bilingual. Maybe French. Maybe English. Maybe both. If I freeze, my mother will kill me." I did not ask why she had applied for a translation fellowship if live language made her freeze. I did not ask why her fear should become my responsibility. I opened my laptop. For 36 hours, I became the engine inside Vivian's mouth. I wrote her opening statement in English, then a French version that sounded natural but not too polished, because panels are suspicious of perfection. I wrote answers about cultural humility, ethics, confidentiality, trauma-informed interpretation, and the danger of literal translation in medical settings. I taught her how to soften the R in responsibility and how not to overpronounce vulnerable like she was auditioning for a perfume ad. I made cue cards in 3 colors. Blue meant personal anecdote. Green meant technical answer. Pink meant emergency pivot if she forgot the question. She laughed when she saw the pink cards and said, "You're insane. I love you." I loved being useful. That was my illness. On the morning of the interview, she hugged me outside the hall, her cheek cold against mine, and whispered, "I owe you my life." She did not know how true that would become. She went in first. Through the frosted glass, I could hear the muffled rise and fall of her voice, bright and steady, because I had built it. When she came out, the panel assistant was smiling. Vivian's hands flew to her mouth. She trembled like a heroine at the end of a film. "They loved me," she whispered. I still remember the violent little pride I felt. I had helped someone shine. Then my own interview began, and every answer I gave sounded like an echo of hers. The panel did not accuse me during the interview. That would have been kinder. They simply cooled. Professor Harlan, who had smiled at my application weeks earlier, looked down at my file and said, "You and Ms. Chiao seem to share similar language around interpretation as ethical responsibility." I thought it was coincidence because I still believed coincidence existed around Vivian. The NGO director asked about a clinic anecdote I had described in my written statement, but when I began answering, he interrupted gently. Ms. Chiao gave a very similar example. The retired diplomat leaned back. The woman from the board stopped taking notes. I tried to explain that Vivian and I had volunteered together once, though we had not. I tried to adjust my answer, but panic makes a cage out of your own ribs. I left knowing something had gone wrong, but I did not understand how complete the trap was until 3 days later, when the fellowship results were posted. Vivian's name was first on the list. Mine was not on it at all. That night, she threw a celebration party in the dorm lounge, wearing a white dress and a modest little expression. Maya helped me practice, she told everyone, squeezing my hand so hard her nails pressed crescents into my skin. Honestly, she's the sweetest. I could never have calmed down without her. I swallowed the humiliation because I thought losing was not the same as being betrayed. I still thought she had won because the panel preferred sparkle over substance. I was wrong. Vivian never accepted a victory unless she could bury the person who made it possible. 2 weeks after the results, I was called into the academic integrity office. The room smelled of toner and mint gum. A folder sat between me and the deputy dean, thick with printed screenshots. Anonymous reports had alleged that I sold translated interview scripts to applicants, including Vivian. There were messages from me to Vivian containing practice answers, pronunciation guides, and revised statements. There were no messages where Vivian asked me to create them, because she had always called after sending vague texts like, "Help, emergency," or "Can you make this better?" There was a bank transfer from Vivian to me for $300 labeled translation, which she had insisted was repayment for months of groceries, and which I had accepted because I was behind on rent. There were timestamps showing my documents had been edited before her interview. There were highlighted similarities between my application and hers, but because she had submitted first and performed first, the shadow fell on me. I told the truth so badly it sounded like a lie. She asked me for help, I said. She said she was anxious. I didn't sell anything. The deputy dean asked why I had written an entire bilingual interview script for another candidate in a competitive fellowship. I had no answer that did not make me sound pathetic. Because she cried. Because I thought friendship meant rescue. Because I did not know kindness could become evidence. Vivian came to the hearing wearing pale pink and carrying tissues she never used. Her statement was perfect because I had once taught her how to sound sincere. She said she had asked me to proofread one short paragraph, but became uncomfortable when I offered extensive assistance and hinted that I knew what the panel might ask because of connections at the clinic. She said she paid me only because I pressured her and she was afraid I would spread rumors. She said she felt guilty accepting my help, but she had been vulnerable. The word vulnerable came out beautifully. I had drilled it into her mouth. People turned to look at me as if I had preyed on a rich girl with glossy hair and a trembling voice. Afterward, outside the hearing room, Vivian leaned close while her mother spoke to the dean. "You should have applied somewhere smaller," she murmured. "Big rooms make people look at you too closely." I remember staring at her, waiting for guilt to crack her face. It never did. The committee gave me a formal misconduct mark, suspended my clinic placement, and removed me from consideration for future university-nominated fellowships. My scholarship renewal went under review. The community clinic stopped scheduling me while they clarified reputational concerns. My mother cried in the laundry room at 2 a.m. because she thought I could not hear her over the washing machines. Vivian flew to Geneva that spring and posted photos beside old stone buildings with captions about finding her voice. People think revenge begins with rage, but mine began with silence. After the hearing, I stopped defending myself because every sentence became another thread in the net. Vivian's friends avoided me with bright, nervous smiles. Professors who once praised my translation work became cautious. My landlord did not care about academic integrity, only rent, so I took evening shifts at a hotel front desk and weekend shifts at a pharmacy. I studied between check-ins and swallowed headaches like vitamins. The only person who believed me without conditions was Mrs. Alvarez, the clinic coordinator, who kept my old glossary on her desk and said, "People who steal words always steal from someone who has them." But belief without power is a candle in a storm. When Vivian returned after her first program rotation, she had new coats, new confidence, and new stories about field communication. At a university gala, I watched her give a speech about language access. She used one of my phrases again. Interpretation is not decoration. It is the difference between consent and surrender. The audience applauded. My hands shook so hard I spilled water on the tablecloth. That night, on my way home from the hotel, rain turned the road silver. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop telling people I stole from you. You can't prove anything." I looked down for 1 second. A horn screamed. The world tilted. Cold pavement kissed my cheek. Somewhere above me, a traffic light blinked red, 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 like a recording light over a stage where my life had been used for someone else's performance. When I opened my eyes again, my alarm was ringing with the same stupid melody I had used in third year, the one Vivian said sounded like a cartoon duck being murdered. For a few seconds, I thought the afterlife was cruelly domestic. Then I smelled the burnt coffee from the dorm kitchenette. I heard the radiator knocking in the wall. I saw my old blue duvet, the cracked phone charger taped at the base, the fellowship interview outfit hanging from my wardrobe door. My hands were unscarred. My chest did not hurt. My phone screen read Tuesday, March 12th, 7:02 a.m. The interview morning. Not the gala. Not the rain. Not the pavement. Interview morning. I lay completely still while the impossible settled over me like snow. Then Vivian burst into the room without knocking, wearing her cream blazer and panic like perfume. "Maya, why aren't you dressed?" she demanded. "I've been calling you. I need the final French version. The one with the ethical responsibility opening and the trauma-informed answer. My printer jammed, and the file on my iPad is old." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, sweet at the edges, steel in the center. In the first life, I had sat up, apologized for oversleeping, and sent the file before brushing my teeth. In this life, I watched her with the detached fascination of a ghost observing the person who killed her. My laptop sat on the desk, closed. Inside it was her script, my work, the weapon she had used to cut my future out of my hands. Vivian snapped her fingers.
"Maya, file. Now."
There are moments when a whole life narrows to one small movement. Mine narrowed to my hand, resting on the laptop lid. I could open it and repeat history. I could refuse and watch the room explode. My old instincts rose first, disgusting in their loyalty. "She's scared. Help her. Don't be cruel. You can still win on your own." Then another memory rose. Vivian leaning close outside the hearing room, whispering, "Big rooms make people look at you too closely." I lifted my hand away from the laptop. "No," I said. Vivian blinked, not understanding the language of refusal because nobody had ever translated it for her. "What?"
"No, Irabat."
"I'm not sending you the script." Her mouth opened, then curved into a laugh so sharp it cut the air. "This is not funny. I'm on at 9. You promised." "I promised in another life," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you having one of your dramatic scholarship girl breakdowns?" In the first life, that sentence would have made me apologize. In this one, it made me smile. Not widely, just enough. "You wrote fluent French on your application," I said. "You wrote independent translation experience. You wrote ethical communication. Go communicate ethically." For the first time since I had known her, Vivian had no immediate line prepared. Her face went blank in the most satisfying way, like a screen after the power is cut. Then she recovered, because predators do not become helpless just because prey develops teeth. "Maya," she said, softening so quickly it would have impressed a drama teacher, "I know you're nervous. We're both nervous. But don't do this 5 minutes before we leave. You helped me all week. You can't suddenly act morally superior." She sat on the edge of my bed without permission, exactly as she had the first time, and reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Her fingers closed on air. That tiny mist changed the temperature of the room. "I helped you because you lied to me," I said. "You said it was practice. You said you wanted confidence. You didn't say you were going to perform my answers as if they came from your own work." "Everyone gets help," she snapped. "Don't be naive. Help is checking grammar. Help is practicing pronunciation. Help is not writing a bilingual identity for someone who can't answer a live question." Vivian stood. The cream blazer made her look innocent from a distance. Up close, rage pinched her mouth ugly. "Do you want money? Is that what this is?"
"Fine."
"How much?" There it was, the sentence that had become evidence in my first life, the seed of the transfer-labeled translation. My phone lay on the desk, recording because I had woken from death with one advantage. I remembered every move in the choreography. I looked at the little black screen and said clearly, "I don't want your money. I don't want your gratitude. I don't want my name attached to your interview. Do not send me any payment. Do not tell anyone I agreed to translate for you. I am refusing now before the interview. In plain English. Vivian followed my gaze to the phone. Her face changed so fast it almost made me laugh. Panic, calculation, hatred, sweetness. All four passed through her eyes like slides in a projector. Are you recording me? She whispered. Yes. That's illegal. We're in a two-party consent state for private conversations, I said, because in the first life I had learned legal details too late, and now they lived in me like bones. But this is our dorm room, and I'm recording my own refusal for my own protection. You can leave. She lunged for the phone. I stepped back and slipped it into my blazer pocket. She stopped short, breathing hard. You think this makes you powerful? She said. You think one recording fixes the fact that nobody likes girls who act like victims? I almost answered. Then I remembered another lesson from the first life. Never argue with someone who is trying to collect your anger as evidence. I opened the door. Your interview is at 9. Vivian stared at the hallway beyond me, as if I had pushed her toward a cliff. Then she lifted her chin. Fine, she said. Keep your ugly little script. I memorized most of it anyway. That was true, and for one moment the old fear bit me. She had heard enough to survive, maybe even shine. She smiled when she saw my expression. You're not the only girl with a brain, Maya. Then she walked out, heels striking the hallway floor like she was already on stage. I did not chase her. I did not shake. I did not collapse dramatically against the door, though a less honest version of me would make that scene prettier. I locked the door, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. The file titled Vivian_final_interview_FR_yen_V6 waited in my documents, like a snake in a jar. In the first life, it had been her ladder and my noose. In this one, I created a new folder named Evidence and moved the file inside, along with screenshots of every message she had sent. Can you make me sound less dumb? Just write what you'd say if you were me. Can you do the French part? I'll literally die. My mom says I need this fellowship for the foundation gala. If I win, I'll bring you something from Geneva, promise. I exported the revision history showing my authorship. I saved the voice notes where I corrected her pronunciation. I copied the application guidelines highlighting the clause that candidates must produce their own interview responses and accurately represent language proficiency. Then I did something I had been too trusting to do before. I emailed the Academic Integrity Office, the fellowship coordinator, and myself. Not an emotional accusation. Not a sob story. Just dates, documents, and one sentence. I am concerned that another candidate may present translated and written materials prepared by me as her own independent work in today's interview. I am withdrawing all permission for my materials to be used. Please document this before the panel begins. Sending that email felt less like revenge than like returning stolen furniture to my own house. I expected fireworks. Instead, the inbox stayed quiet. The radiator knocked. Someone laughed down the hall. A girl in the bathroom cursed at her eyeliner. Life continued with offensive normality, as if I had not just split time open and stepped into the wound. I dressed slowly. Navy blazer, white blouse, black trousers, hair pinned back. In the first life, I had worn a gray dress Vivian said looked humble in a good way, which I later realized meant forgettable. This time, I chose clothes that made me feel like a person with shoulders. My folder contained my own application, my clinic glossary, a printed sample of a translated consent form, and a page of notes I had written for myself, not for Vivian. At 8:04, my phone exploded. Vivian, send it. Vivian. Maya, stop. Vivian, I'm serious. Vivian, you're ruining both of us. Vivian, my mother is asking why I'm crying. Vivian, I'll tell them you helped me and then got jealous. Vivian, pick up. I watched the messages arrive without answering. Then came a call from Lydia, our mutual friend, whose main talent was mistaking proximity to power for diplomacy. I answered on speaker while packing my bag. Maya, Lydia whispered urgently. What is happening? Vivian is in the bathroom having a panic attack. She should breathe. She says you took away her interview script. Her interview script?
I asked.
Silence. Lydia was not stupid, only comfortable. Well, she said carefully, the one you helped with. If it belongs to her, she can use it without me. Lydia sighed. Can you not make a feminist ethics issue out of everything? Just send the girl the file. You're better at languages anyway. You'll be fine. There it was, the whole social order in one sentence. Give away your advantage because watching someone else suffer from not having it is impolite. I said, no, and hung up. Vivian's mother called at 8:17. I knew because Vivian had forced me to save the number under Annie Chow after a gala where her mother called me. The scholarship won 3 times. I let it ring until the last second, then answered. Maya, Mrs. Chow said without greeting, Vivian tells me you are refusing to provide materials you prepared together. This is extremely unprofessional. Her voice had the polished chill of marble floors. Good morning, Mrs. Chow. Do not play cute. You girls have a misunderstanding. Send the file, attend your interview, and afterward we can discuss appropriate compensation. No, I heard a tiny intake of breath. People like Mrs. Chow were unused to hearing one syllable stand without decoration. Excuse me?
No.
I will not send Vivian interview answers I wrote. I will not accept compensation. I have emailed the coordinator to document that. The pause that followed was not silence. It was machinery recalculating. You sent an email? Yes. Her voice lowered. Listen to me carefully. Students from backgrounds like yours should be careful about appearing vindictive. Vivian has supported you socially. Our family has been very kind. I looked around the dorm room. The cracked charger, the thrifted mug, the stack of bills hidden under a grammar textbook. Kindness had never looked like this. Your daughter can speak for herself, I said. That is the point of an interview. Mrs. Chow abandoned polish. You ungrateful little. I ended the call before she finished. My hand trembled afterward. Not from fear. From the strange physical shock of surviving a sentence I once would have obeyed. The campus looked washed clean by morning rain. All wet stone and reflected sky. Students hurried under umbrellas, laughing, complaining, carrying coffees, unaware that time had already killed me once beside a traffic light and returned me with receipts. The interview building stood at the edge of the old quad, a glass and sandstone hybrid donors loved because it made tradition look expensive. Outside the entrance, candidates gathered in nervous clusters. Some practiced answers. Some stared at nothing. Some had parents fussing over collars. Vivian stood near the revolving doors with Lydia and 2 girls from our program, looking pale but composed enough to perform victimhood. When she saw me, her eyes sharpened. Lydia looked away. The other girls stared openly, hungry for context. Vivian walked toward me with a small tragic smile, the one she used when professors asked whether group projects were going well. Maya, she said, just loud enough for the cluster to hear, can we please talk like adults? I don't know why you're doing this today.
Nice.
She had moved from panic to audience management. I kept walking. She stepped into my path. I'm begging you. Don't punish me because you're scared of competing. A few heads turned. That line might have worked in the first life. I would have flushed, defended myself, sounded jealous. This time, I looked at the students watching us and said calmly, Vivian, I'm not stopping you from competing. I'm refusing to provide you with answers for a language proficiency interview.
The air changed.
Someone's eyebrows rose. Vivian's smile stiffened. That's a disgusting thing to imply. Then you'll be able to prove me wrong in the interview. I moved around her and entered the building. The waiting area had cream walls, quiet carpet, and a table of bottled water nobody drank because nervous stomachs do not trust hospitality. A coordinator named Ms. Bell checked badges at the desk. In the first life, she had smiled at Vivian like a proud aunt and at me like a question mark. This time, when I gave my name, her eyes flicked up with something sharper. Ms. Reyes, she said. Please wait here. The panel schedule may be adjusted. Adjusted. One word, and I knew the email had landed. I sat beside the window, opened my folder, and forced myself to review my own notes. Vivian sat across the room, surrounded by her little court, whispering intensely. Every few seconds, she glanced at me. Lydia typed on her phone. Vivian's hands were clenched around a folded paper. I recognized my phrasing in the fragments visible between her fingers. She had printed an older version. Version 3, maybe. The one before I fixed the answer about interpreters avoiding personal advice. In that draft, I had included a deliberately rough placeholder. I learned that translation is not just exact words, but human meaning. It was decent, but not enough. It did not have the statistics, the clinic anecdote, the French ethics quote, or the emergency pivots. She had bones without muscle. Then Professor Harlan entered the waiting area. The room straightened. He wore the expression of a man trying not to reveal that a bomb had been found under the floorboards. "Good morning, candidates," he said. "Due to a procedural update, today's interviews will include a brief live language verification exercise for applicants who listed advanced proficiency." Vivian's folded paper crumpled slightly in her fist. Pattern interruption number 1. Live verification had not happened in the first life. In the first life, the panel asked predictable questions because they trusted written applications and polished interviews. My email changed the room before Vivian even entered it. Professor Harlan continued, "Candidates should answer without notes unless explicitly instructed. Phones and electronic devices will remain outside." A murmur passed through the waiting area. Most candidates looked nervous, but not destroyed. Vivian looked like someone had removed the floor. She raised her hand halfway, then lowered it when she saw others watching. Ms. Bell began collecting phones into labeled envelopes. Vivian turned toward Lydia in panic. Lydia mouthed, "Bathroom?" Vivian stood too quickly, but Ms. Bell said, "Miss Chow, you're first. The panel is ready." First. Just like before. But before, first meant she could use my work untouched and leave my interview contaminated by echoes. This time, first meant she would hit the wall before anyone else knew its shape. Vivian's eyes found mine. For a second, under the makeup and anger, I saw the small animal fear she had used for years to make me open doors. My chest tightened.
Not sympathy, exactly.
A reflex. She mouthed, "Please." It was almost convincing. Then I remembered my mother crying over laundry machines. I remembered the hearing folder. I remembered cold rain. I looked down at my notes. Ms. Bell opened the frosted glass door. "Miss Chow." Vivian lifted her chin, smoothed her blazer, and walked into the interview hall with my old draft dying in her hand. Waiting outside while someone collapses because you stop holding them upright is not as satisfying as people imagine. It is tense. It is quiet. It makes you confront the uncomfortable truth that you were part of the architecture of their deception. Through the frosted glass, voices blurred, but I could catch rhythm. Professor Harlan's warm introduction. Vivian's bright greeting. A chair scraping. Then her opening statement began. English first. She sounded almost like the Vivian from the first life, smooth enough to fool anyone who wanted to be fooled. "Language is not only a bridge," she said, voice slightly muffled. "It is also a responsibility, because people deserve to be understood with dignity." Not exact. Close. My jaw tightened. Across from me, Lydia exhaled in relief. Vivian continued, gathering confidence as memory caught. "In my volunteer experience, I saw how fear can grow when patients cannot express themselves, and how the interpreter must not decorate meaning but protect it." Decorate meaning. She had kept that phrase too. My phrase. For one burning second, I wondered if nothing could be changed, if thieves always carried enough stolen gold to buy another door. Then a new voice spoke. Female, crisp, accented. Dr. Amélie Laurent, the board's specialist.
Merci, Ms. Chiao.
Since you list advanced French, please continue in French and describe a time when direct translation would have caused harm. Silence. Not long. Maybe 3 seconds. But in an interview, 3 seconds is a staircase with no railing.
Vivian Began. Oui, bien sûr. Je pense que la traduction est très importante pour les personnes vulnérables. The word vulnérable came out overpolished.
Then she stopped. The silence widened. Inside the room, someone encouraged her gently. "Take your time." Vivian took too much. Paper rustled. Dr. Laurent said, "Without notes, please." My heart began to pound so hard I felt it in my throat. Vivian tried again. Dans mon expérience, j'ai vu la père grandir, quand le patient n'y peut pas. She was translating the English opening in her head, piece by piece, without the grammar to hold it.
Ne peut pas parler ses sentiments, she finished.
Not catastrophic, but weak.
Den docteur. Laurent Asquet a follow-up, fasté, natural French, note textbook French. Comment gériez-vous une situation où la famille demande de cacher un diagnostic au patient?
How would you handle a situation where the family asks to hide a diagnosis from the patient? This had not been in the script. It was not obscure. It was exactly the kind of ethical question a real interpreter should handle. Vivian said, "Pardon?" Dr. Laurent repeated it more slowly. Vivian answered in English. I would be very respectful of the family and also the patient, because culture is important.
A pause.
The retired diplomat said, "Could you answer in French?" Vivian laughed softly, that social laugh she used to turn mistakes into charm. Of course, I just wanted to be precise.
Then she said, Je respecte la famille et le patient parce que la culture est important.
Important, not importante. Again, not fatal alone. But lies rarely die from one wound. They bleed out through accumulation. Professor Harlan asked, Miss Chiao, what level of French coursework have you completed? Vivian replied, Independent study. Dr. Laurent asked in English now, with whom? Vivian said, various tutors. Can you name one? Silence returned, this time with teeth. The door opened suddenly. Not the interview hall door. The waiting area door behind us. Pattern interruption number 2. Mrs. Chiao swept in wearing pearls and fury, followed by a man in a gray suit I recognized from university donor brochures. She went straight to Ms. Bell's desk. I need to speak with Professor Harlan immediately, she said. Ms. Bell stood. The panel is in session. There has been harassment of a candidate. Every eye in the waiting room jumped to me. Mrs. Chiao made sure of it. A malicious email was sent this morning by another student attempting to undermine my daughter. Ms. Bell's professional smile did not move. Please wait outside until the interview concludes. Do you know who I am? Mrs. Chiao asked. The man in the gray suit touched her elbow as if warning her that cameras might exist. She shook him off. My family funds the East Wing Language Lab. Ms. Bell's voice cooled by 1 degree. Then you will appreciate that this building has clear procedures. I had never loved bureaucracy before that moment. It stood there in a navy suit and blocked a rich woman from storming the panel. Mrs. Chiao turned, saw me, and crossed the room so fast Lydia flinched. You, she said. I remained seated. In the first life, I would have stood out of respect. You think you can destroy my daughter because you are jealous? Your daughter is in an interview, I said. She can speak for herself. Mrs. Chiao leaned down, perfume sharp. Girls like you survive by being useful. Do not forget your function. The waiting room went silent. Even Lydia looked shocked. I looked up at her and smiled without warmth. Thank you for saying that where other people can hear. Inside the panel room, Vivian's voice rose. Not loudly, but enough that the waiting area caught fragments. I did not know there would be this kind of test. Dr. Laurent replied, the program description states that listed language proficiencies may be verified. Vivian said, yes, but I prepared for policy questions. The retired diplomat asked something I could not hear. Vivian answered, I had help practicing, but the ideas are mine. My pulse steadied. There it was. The pivot from performance to shared responsibility. Mrs. Chiao heard it too. Her face tightened. The interview hall door opened, and Ms. Bell stepped in at a signal. For a moment all we saw was a slice of the room. Long table, water glasses, Vivian sitting too straight, panelists with careful faces. Ms. Bell murmured something. The door closed again. Mrs. Chiao demanded, what is happening? No one answered. Minutes passed. I counted them by the second hand on the wall clock. 7 minutes.
8. 9.
Then the frosted door opened fully, and Vivian came out. Her face was white except for 2 red spots high on her cheeks. She was not crying.
Not yet.
Crying would come when she had an audience she could control. Behind her, Professor Harlan stood at the threshold. Ms. Reyes, he said, the panel would like to speak with you before proceeding to your scheduled interview. Every head turned. Vivian's eyes flashed with triumph through panic. She thought this meant I was being pulled into her accusation. Maybe in another life it would have. This time, I rose with my folder, walked past Mrs. Chiao, and entered the room without lowering my head. The interview hall was colder than I remembered. 5 panelists sat behind a curved table. A recorder blinked red in the center, the same red as the traffic light from my last memory, but this time I did not look away. Professor, Harlan gestured to the chair opposite them. Ms. Reyes, thank you. Before your formal interview begins, we need to clarify a matter related to materials submitted and potentially used by another candidate. His voice was neutral, but his eyes held apology. Dr. Laurent had Vivian's application in front of her, marked with yellow tabs. The NGO director, Mr. Mensah, held a printed copy of my email. The board specialist, a severe woman named Helen Park, looked directly at me. Did you prepare written interview responses for Ms. Chiao? She asked. In the first life, that question had destroyed me because it arrived after Vivian's story hardened around it. This time, it arrived while the clay was still wet. Yes, I said. Vivian, seated in a side chair now, inhaled sharply. Mrs. Chiao had been allowed in as an observer and stood near the back wall with the donor man, arms folded. The panelists watched me. I continued. I prepared practice materials after Ms. Chiao repeatedly asked for help and represented the task as language practice for anxiety. This morning, before the interview, I refused permission for her to use any written responses I created and notified the coordinator. I also refused payment. Helen Park asked, "Do you have documentation?" I opened my folder. Yes. The sound of the paper sliding across the table was soft, but Vivian flinched as if it struck her. Documentation is not dramatic until you have lived without it. Then it becomes thunder. I handed over the message screenshots, the revision history, the file metadata, and the recording transcript I had typed in the hour before arriving because rebirth does not make you magical, but terror makes you efficient. Professor Harlan read silently. Dr. Laurent's eyebrows moved once. Mr. Mensah turned a page and looked at Vivian. Helen Park asked, Ms. Chiao, did you write the phrase, translation is the ethics of being understood independently? Vivian's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. We discussed concepts together, she said. Maya likes to exaggerate her role because she's insecure about competing with me. There it was, but weaker now. A poisoned arrow fired through fog. Helen Park looked at me. Ms. Reyes. I said, that phrase appears in my draft document created 3 days before Ms. Chiao messaged me asking, can you make my opening sound deeper? The revision history is attached. Dr. Laurent flipped to the highlighted page. Vivian's breathing grew louder. Mrs. Chiao stepped forward. This is absurd. Students practice together all the time. Are we punishing collaboration now? Mr. Mensah spoke, for the first time. His voice was low and tired. Collaboration is when both people stand on the work. Misrepresentation is when one person wears the other person's work as a face. I did not know him, but in that moment I wanted to cry for how simple truth sounded in the mouth of someone with authority. Vivian made her first real mistake then. Not the French errors. Not the shaky answers. Those could be forgiven. Her mistake was losing control of the mask. She turned to me, eyes wet now, and hissed. You said you wanted to help. You said friends don't let friends embarrass themselves. Every panelist heard. The sentence hung there, naked and stupid. I almost pitied her. Almost. Helen Park leaned back. Miss Chiao, did you believe you would embarrass yourself without Ms. Reyes's materials? Vivian's eyes widened. That's not what I meant, Dr. Laurent asked. What did you mean? Vivian looked toward her mother, but Mrs. Chiao's face had gone hard in warning. I meant interviews are stressful, Vivian said. Maya is twisting everything. Professor, Harlan tapped the application. You listed advanced French and independent live interpretation experience. During the verification exercise, you appeared unable to answer basic scenario questions in French. Can you explain that discrepancy? Vivian swallowed. The old Vivian would have cried here. This Vivian tried dignity first. I have performance anxiety.
Docteur. Laurent nodded.
That is understandable. Would you be comfortable reading this short paragraph aloud and summarizing it in English? She slid a single page across the table. Vivian stared at it. I was close enough to see the title, Consentement éclair pour vaccination communautaire. Informed consent for community vaccination. Not difficult for advanced French. Impossible for someone who had memorized pretty lines. Vivian picked up the page. Her fingers trembled.
Je, sous-signé, comprends que la vaccination, she pronounced vaccination like vacation.
No one smiled. That made it worse. Pattern interruption number 3 arrived as a knock. Ms. Bell entered with a tablet and whispered to Professor Harlan. He looked at the screen, then at Helen Park. Helen's expression sharpened. Ms. Reyes, she said, did you also submit a work sample with your application involving a translated consent form from the Eastbridge Community Clinic? Yes. Ms. Chow submitted a similar sample, she said. The file properties list the author as M. Reyes. The room went so quiet I heard the faint hum of the ceiling lights. Vivian's head jerked up. That's not possible. It was possible because Vivian had always been sloppy when she believed someone else would clean up after her. In the first life, I had not known she submitted my clinic translation sample, slightly edited under her name. The committee must have discovered it too late or buried it under the easier story that I sold materials. This time, my email made them look before the narrative settled. Helen turned the tablet so Vivian could see. Can you explain why your submitted PDF lists Ms. Reyes as original author? Vivian stared. Her lips moved. No sound. Mrs. Chow stepped forward again. Metadata can be manipulated. Helen looked at her. Indeed. That is why we will be referring the matter for full review rather than deciding solely on one data point. Full review. Words that sounded polite but landed like a trapdoor. Vivian finally cried. Not gracefully. Not the cinematic tears she could summon at will. These came hot and furious. Maya gave it to me, she burst out. She said I could use examples. I said, I gave you a practice template with watermarks. Not permission to submit my clinic work as yours. Vivian pointed at me. You wanted me to fail. You planned this. I looked at the panel, not at her.
No.
I planned to stop helping her deceive you. There is a difference between revenge and exposure. Revenge adds a punishment. Exposure removes a costume. I had imagined, in the darkest corners of the first life, that if Vivian were ever caught, I would feel a wild, clean joy. Instead, sitting in that cold room, I felt something heavier and quieter. The joy was there, yes, but beneath it was grief for the girl I had been, the girl who thought friendship meant becoming someone else's invisible labor. Vivian sobbed into her hands. Mrs. Chow demanded a private conversation. The donor man stared at the carpet, as if hoping it would open and swallow his association. Professor, Harlan called a pause. Miss Chow, your interview will be suspended pending review. You will be contacted by the committee. Suspended, not failed, not destroyed. Universities love words that give consequences soft shoes. Vivian looked up, mascara beginning to track. What about Maya? She said, voice shaking with hatred. She admitted she wrote materials. That's misconduct too. Professor Harlan turned to me, and for 1 second the old fear returned. Because she was not entirely wrong. I had written materials. I had cross lines. I had confused help with impersonation. In this life, honesty was my only weapon, and it could cut me too. Helen Park asked, Ms. Reyes, why did you prepare these materials? The room waited. I could have softened it. I could have said I was manipulated, anxious, confused. All true, but incomplete. I took a breath. Because I had poor boundaries, I said. Because I thought helping a friend meant preventing her from facing consequences. Because I underestimated how unethical it is to put my words in someone else's mouth during a competitive process. That is why I withdrew permission and disclosed it before the interview. I accept responsibility for preparing them. I will not accept responsibility for her using them as her own work after I refused. The panel did not applaud. Real vindication rarely comes with music. They asked me to step outside while they conferred. I stood in the hallway with Vivian and her mother. Lydia had disappeared, which was her usual response to moral weather. Vivian wiped her face with the back of her hand, ruining the soft girl tragedy she had curated. For a moment she looked young, not younger than me but smaller than the version of herself she sold. "You think they'll pick you now?" she whispered. "After this? You look dirty too." I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Maybe. Then why do it? Because I already lived through what happens when I don't. She stared at me. "You're insane." Maybe I was. Rebirth is not exactly a mental health plan. Mrs. Chiao stepped between us. "Maya, listen carefully. Withdraw the email. Say you misunderstood. I can make this disappear for both of you." I looked at her. In the first life, this woman had made me disappear without touching me. Now she was offering erasure as mercy. "No," her nostrils flared. "You are making an enemy far above your level." "I know," I said. "I met you last time." She did not understand that, of course. That was fine. Some sentences are not for the listener. They are for the version of you who used to stay silent. Vivian laughed once, broken and sharp. "You'll regret this." I looked through the glass wall at the rain clearing over the quad. I already did. When Ms. Bell called me back in, the panel had rearranged the table. Vivian and her mother were not invited. My interview would proceed, but with a note that the committee would separately review my involvement in preparing materials.
Fair.
Terrifying, but fair. I sat, folded my hands, and waited. Professor Harlan looked older than he had an hour ago. "Ms. Reyes," he said, "before we begin formally, I want to acknowledge the complexity of the situation. You disclosed a concern before the process was compromised further. That matters. It does not erase poor judgment in preparing materials for another candidate. It does, however, distinguish disclosure from concealment." I nodded.
No tears.
Tears would be honest, but I refused to spend them in front of a panel that needed clarity from me. Helen Park pressed the recorder. "We will begin your interview now. Please answer from your own experience." That sentence, "from your own experience," almost made me laugh. My whole life had been waiting for someone to ask me that. Professor Harlan began with the standard question, "Why do you want to join the International Fellows Program?" In the first life, my answer had been contaminated by Vivian's echo. This time, I did not reach for polished lines. I pictured Mrs. Chan at the clinic, signing a form she could not read because her son said, "It's fine, just sign." I pictured my mother holding utility bills like they were medical scans. I pictured the pavement, the traffic light, the second chance. Because language access is where dignity either enters the room or gets left outside, I said. And I have seen what happens when people treat translation as decoration instead of consent. The panel listened differently when the words came from the person who had lived them. I told them about Eastbridge Clinic, where patients nodded through explanations because nodding is safer than admitting confusion. I told them about translating vaccination consent forms and learning that accuracy was not enough if the tone frightened people. I told them about an elderly man who thought adverse event meant the government would punish him if he reported side effects, and how changing the phrase to plain language altered his willingness to ask questions. Dr. Laurent switched into French halfway through, not gently. She asked about confidentiality when family members insist on interpreting for patients. I answered in French first, then English when Helen requested clarification for the record. My French was not perfect in the cinematic way. It had a lived-in edge, shaped by community centers, radio programs, and repetition under my breath while washing dishes. But it held. Dr. Laurent pushed harder. What if the patient's adult daughter says the diagnosis will destroy him emotionally and asks you to soften it? I said, the interpreter does not own the diagnosis. The clinician must communicate truth with compassion. My role is to preserve meaning, register, and intent, not to decide what the patient can survive. But I can alert the clinician to cultural context and ask for a pause if harm is unfolding. Mr. Mensah leaned forward. And if the clinician uses jargon that has no direct equivalent? Then I ask for clarification, not because I am incompetent, but because pretending to understand is more dangerous than interrupting. It was not a perfect answer. It was a real one. For once, real felt stronger than perfect. Then Helen Park did something that had not happened in the first life. She slid 2 short documents across the table. Please review these. One is a machine-translated discharge instruction. The other is a human revision. Identify 3 differences that matter ethically, not stylistically. Pattern interruption number 4. A test within a test. I felt my pulse jump, then settle. This was my ground, not Vivian's polished stage.
Meaning?
I scanned the documents. The machine version translated take with food into a phrase that could mean take after eating, but the human revision clarified during a meal to reduce nausea. The machine version rendered if symptoms worsen in a vague future tense that sounded optional. The revision made it urgent. The machine version translated dizziness with a word associated with spiritual imbalance in one dialect community, which could trigger stigma. The human revision used a plain physical description. I explained each difference, careful not to overclaim. Dr. Laurent asked whether machine translation had any place in public health. I said yes, but not as a substitute for accountability. A machine can draft a bridge, I said, but someone has to inspect whether people will fall through it. Professor Harlan made a note. I did not try to see whether it was good. In the first life, I watched faces too closely and lost my own thread. This time, I stayed inside my answer. Halfway through, there was a muffled commotion outside. Vivian's voice, then Mrs. Chiao's, then Ms. Bell's low firmness. The panel paused. A lesser story would make Vivian burst in and confess everything, but real people rarely hand you clean endings. Instead, Ms. Bell entered and whispered that Ms. Chiao was requesting immediate access to the dean and threatening donor withdrawal. Professor Harlan closed his eyes for 1 second. Helen Park said, "We continue." That was all. We continue. The most beautiful sentence in any institution is not "we are sorry" or "you were right." It is "we continue" when someone powerful tries to interrupt accountability. So we did. Mr. Mensah asked me about failure. Not Vivian.
Me.
Tell us about a time you made an ethical mistake in communication and what you changed afterward. The question landed exactly where I was bruised. I could have chosen a safer example. Instead, I looked at the documents on the table and said, "This week, I prepared too much material for another candidate because I confused support with substitution." I told myself I was being kind. In reality, I was helping create a false representation. I changed course when I realized the work might be presented as hers. Going forward, I would set boundaries at practice, feedback, and resources, not authorship. Kindness without boundaries can become dishonesty. The room went very still. Helen Park looked at me for a long moment, then wrote something down. That answer might have cost me the fellowship. It also returned me to myself. When I left the panel room, the hallway had transformed into a theater after the curtain falls and everyone sees the wires. Vivian sat on a bench near the far wall, no longer surrounded. Lydia stood a few feet away, pretending to study a poster about global citizenship. Mrs. Chiao was on the phone, speaking in clipped phrases. No, not withdrawal yet reputational issues, procedural bias. The donor man had vanished. Vivian looked up as I emerged. Her eyes searched my face for devastation. When she did not find it, something inside her cracked further. "Did you cry?" she asked. "No." "Did they ask about me?" "They asked about translation." She laughed bitterly. "You always do that. Act above everything. Like you're pure." I stopped in front of her. "I'm not pure. I was convenient. There's a difference." Lydia flinched, as if the words had touched her too. Vivian stood, swaying slightly. "I hope you're proud. My mother says the committee is suspending my application. Your application suspended itself when it lied. I would have been fine if you'd just helped me." There it was, the whole confession reduced to childish math. If you had held the mask, nobody would have seen my face. I almost walked away. Then I turned back because there was one thing I needed to say, not for cruelty but for closure. "Vivian, you didn't freeze because I refused to translate your script. You froze because there was nothing behind it." Her hand moved before her judgment did. She slapped me. The sound cracked across the waiting area. Everyone froze. Ms. Bell rose from the desk. Mrs. Chiao stopped mid-sentence. My cheek burned. Vivian stared at her own hand, horrified, not because she had hurt me, but because she had done it in public. Pattern interruption number 5. I did not slap her back. The first life version of me might have. Not from violence, but from accumulated humiliation demanding shape. This version touched my cheek, turned to Ms. Bell, and said, "Please note that." Ms. Bell's expression became glacial. "Security has already been called." Vivian whispered, "Maya." It was the first time all morning she said my name without using it as a handle. Mrs. Chiao rushed forward. It was stress. She is under enormous stress. So was I said. I didn't hit anyone. The other candidates watched with the stunned focus of people witnessing a scholarship brochure catch fire. Lydia finally moved. "Viv, sit down." Vivian jerked away from her. "Don't touch me." Security arrived, 2 polite officers who looked deeply tired of rich family emergencies. They did not drag anyone. They asked Vivian and Mrs. Chiao to step into a private office. Mrs. Chiao protested. Vivian cried harder. Ms. Bell documented. I stood by the window, cheek pulsing, and felt the strangest sensation. Not triumph, not even relief, but balance. In the first life, Vivian had struck me invisibly, and everyone asked why I bruised so easily. In this life, she hit me where people could see. That did not make it better. It made it legible. By afternoon, the campus had mutated. Rumor moves faster than official email, especially when carried by students who just watched a donor's daughter fail a language test, accuse a scholarship student, get confronted with metadata, and slap someone beside a poster that said ethical leadership for a global future. My phone filled with messages. Some from classmates pretending concern. Some from people who had ignored me for years, but now wanted front-row details. Lydia sent 3 paragraphs beginning with, "I'm not defending Vivian, but," which is how people defend Vivian. I deleted them unread after the first line. The Academic Integrity Office requested a meeting the next day to discuss my disclosure and involvement. That could still go badly. I was not naive enough to think truth automatically wins because you present it in chronological order. Institutions protect themselves first, justice second, and vulnerable students only when convenient. But the timeline had shifted. I had reported before the interview. I had refused payment on recording. I had metadata. I had witnesses. I had a red mark on my cheek and a room full of candidates who saw Vivian's mask fall. Most importantly, Vivian had not left that room holding my future in her hands. For the first time in either life, the damage belonged to the person who caused it. The next morning, I walked into the Academic Integrity Office by choice instead of being summoned like a criminal. The same deputy dean from my first life sat behind the desk, but this time the folder between us was thinner and less certain of itself. Professor Harlan attended by video. Helen Park sat beside him in a small square, face composed. The deputy dean asked me to describe the timeline from the beginning. I did. I did not beautify myself. I said I wrote drafts. I said I gave pronunciation support. I said I failed to draw ethical boundaries early. I said I panicked when I realized Vivian intended to perform my words, then refused and disclosed. The deputy dean asked why I had not reported earlier. Because I was embarrassed, I said. Because I knew I had participated in something inappropriate before I understood how serious it was. Because the social cost of confronting Vivian felt larger than the ethical risk until the interview made it immediate. He looked at me over his glasses. That is a very candid answer. I almost smiled. In the first life, honesty made me look guilty because it arrived surrounded by Vivian's lies. In this life, honesty arrived first and built its own frame. Helen Park asked whether I had accepted money. I played the recording from the dorm room where Vivian offered, and I refused. The deputy dean's pen stopped moving when Mrs. Chiao's voice came through from the later call. Students from backgrounds like yours should be careful about appearing vindictive. He did not comment. He did not need to. Some sentences convict themselves. The review lasted 2 hours. At the end, The deputy dean folded his hands. Ms. Reyes, preparing substantive responses for another candidate was inappropriate. You understand that? Yes. However, the evidence supports that you disclosed the concern before the interview, withdrew permission for use, refused compensation, and cooperated fully. We will issue a written caution regarding boundaries in competitive academic processes, not a misconduct finding. For a second, the words did not enter me. Written caution. Not misconduct. Not suspension. Not future destroyed. A caution. A bruise, not a burial. Professor Harlan added, the fellowship committee will consider your application independently. Ms. Chiao's application is under separate review. Independently. Another ordinary word that felt like a miracle. I thanked them, gathered my folder, and left before my knees could betray me. Outside, I went into the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally cried. Not pretty tears. Not heroic tears. The kind that shake your spine. I cried for the first life nobody else remembered. I cried for my mother in the laundry room. I cried for the version of me lying on cold pavement, thinking her last message in the world was a threat from the girl who stole her voice. Then I washed my face, looked at my reflection, and whispered, "We continue." Vivian disappeared from campus for 3 days, which meant her friends had to develop personalities without her supervision. The results were uneven. Lydia tried to sit with me in the library on Thursday, carrying 2 coffees like a peace treaty. I did not look up from my glossary. I brought oat milk, she said. You hate oat milk, I replied. Vivian likes oat milk. She stared at the cups as if betrayed by dairy.
Right.
She sat anyway, because people who avoid conflict often mistake persistence for repair. I didn't know it was that bad, she said. You knew enough. Maya, she told us you offered. She said you were intense about helping, and then got weird when she might win. I looked at her then. Lydia's face was open, miserable, and not innocent. Did you believe her? I didn't want to choose. That means you chose the person with more power and called it neutrality. She flinched. I almost softened it. Then I didn't. Growth is sometimes letting a true sentence remain uncomfortable. Lydia pushed 1 coffee toward me. I'm sorry. For what? She blinked. For not asking you. That's a start. Can we be okay? I returned my notes. Not today. She sat there for another minute, then took both coffees and left. In the first life, I would have accepted the apology because loneliness makes crumbs look like bread. In this life, I let myself stay hungry rather than eat from the hand that had watched me starve. The official email came the following Monday at 4:43 p.m. because life-changing messages love arriving when you are doing something stupid, like comparing laundry detergent prices. I was in the supermarket aisle holding 2 bottles and calculating cost per liter when my phone buzzed. International Fellows Program. Outcome notification. My hands went cold. I did not open it immediately. I put both detergents back.
Picked one up again.
Put it back. A woman beside me gave me the cautious look people give strangers who may be deciding whether to cry near fabric softener. I stepped into the corner by the mops and opened the email. Dear Ms. Reyes, we are pleased to offer you a place in the International Fellows Program. For a moment, the supermarket vanished. No music.
No fluorescent lights.
No old man arguing with self-checkout. Just those words, black on white, impossible and real. We are pleased. Offer you a place. Not Vivian. Not the ghost of my labor wearing Vivian's face.
Me.
My knees bent slightly, and I grabbed the shelf. The email continued with conditions, orientation dates, confidentiality agreements, travel documentation, and a note that the committee had been particularly impressed by your applied ethics analysis and community translation work. Applied ethics. Community translation. My work had reached the room in my name. I laughed once, a broken little sound that made the woman by the fabric softener move away. Then I called my mother. She answered on the 5th ring, breathless from work.
Maya?
Is something wrong? I tried to speak.
Couldn't.
She went silent. Mothers know the shape of disaster through a phone. Maya? I swallowed. I got it, I said. I got the fellowship. For 3 seconds, there was no sound. Then my mother sobbed so loudly a machine beeped in the background, and I stood between mops and detergent crying with her. Victory did not erase the first life. That surprised me. I thought getting the fellowship would feel like stepping into sunlight, so bright all shadows burned away. Instead, it felt like moving into a house where one room remained locked. I still woke some nights with the sound of a horn in my ears. I still flinched when unknown numbers texted. I still watched Vivian's old phrases appear in my head and had to remind myself they had returned to me. But victory changed the direction of gravity. My mother put the offer letter on our refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a tomato. Mrs. Alvarez at the clinic hugged me so hard my ribs complained and said, "I told you words come home." Professor Harlan sent a brief email congratulating me and attaching reading materials for the summer, because academics express emotion through PDFs. Helen Park wrote one sentence, "Your boundary statement in the interview stayed with the committee." I printed that too. Not for the refrigerator. For my desk. Kindness without boundaries can become dishonesty. It was mine, and I needed to remember it more than anyone. Vivian, meanwhile, became a cautionary whisper. The committee found multiple misrepresentations in her application, including the clinic sample and inflated language proficiency. Her fellowship application was withdrawn from consideration. The university opened a conduct case. Her mother did not withdraw the East Wing funding, though she stopped attending campus events for a while, which was perhaps the only punishment that truly hurt her. The confrontation I expected came 2 weeks later outside the library, under a jacaranda tree dropping purple flowers onto the pavement like bruises pretending to be decoration. Vivian looked different.
No cream blazer.
No perfect hair. She wore a black hoodie and sunglasses, though the sky was cloudy. I saw her before she saw me and considered turning around. Then I didn't. Avoidance had protected her too often. She stepped into my path. "You won," she said. Her voice was flat. "Yes." She seemed startled that I did not deny it. "You could at least pretend you're sad about what happened to me." "Are you sad about what happened to me in the first?" I stopped. Wrong timeline. Wrong evidence. Vivian frowned.
"What?"
I adjusted my bag. "Are you sad about what you tried to do to me?" She looked away. For a moment, I saw the machine behind her eyes searching for the most useful answer. "I was scared," she said finally. "My mother, you don't know what she's like." "I know exactly what she's like." "Then you know I had pressure." The old reflex rose. Understand her, soften, rescue. I let it rise and pass. "Pressure explains fear," I said. "It doesn't explain stealing my work and framing me before I could defend myself." Vivian's mouth tightened. "I didn't frame you. Not this time." The words slipped out before I could stop them. She stared. I shook my head. "Never mind." She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, but I could not tell whether from crying or not sleeping. "Do you know what everyone is saying about me?" "Probably less than what they would have said about me if your plan worked." "You're cruel now." That almost made me laugh. "No," I said. "I'm just no longer useful." Vivian's face twisted. "I apologized in the conduct meeting because they asked if you showed remorse." "You don't know that." "I know you." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think the fellowship people love you? They love your sad little clinic story. They love that you're poor and ethical and can make them feel like choosing you means the system works. You're still being used." It was the sharpest thing she had said all day because it was not entirely false. Institutions do love a clean, resilient story. They love poor girls who overcome as long as the girls do not ask why the hurdles were placed there. In the first life, that truth might have broken me. This time I nodded. "Maybe." Vivian blinked. Maybe they're using my story. Maybe I'm using their funding. Maybe both can be true. The difference is I know what I'm trading now." She looked frustrated, as if I had refused to stand where she aimed. "You'll become just like them," she said. "Maybe," I said again. "But I won't become like you." Her hand twitched. For a second, I thought she might slap me again. Instead, she put her sunglasses back on. "My mother says we can appeal." "Then appeal." "You're not scared?" I looked at her, really looked. The girl who had terrified me across 2 lives now stood under falling flowers, smaller than her own reputation, still dangerous, but no longer enormous. "I'm scared all the time," I said. I just stopped obeying it. I walked around her. This time, she did not follow. Orientation began in June. The fellowship cohort gathered in a lecture room with name tents, too much coffee, and the bright awkwardness of people trying to seem humble about being chosen. I kept expecting someone to point at me and say there had been a mistake. Instead, the program director handed me a packet and said, "We're glad you're here, Maya." My name sounded strange in official kindness. During introductions, students spoke about policy research, rural health, migrant law, AI translation tools, disability access, and indigenous language preservation. They were brilliant, nervous, self-conscious, alive. When my turn came, I did not use the line about bridges. I had retired it, at least temporarily, because Vivian had dragged it through too many rooms. I said, "I'm interested in what happens at the moment someone is asked to consent to something they do not fully understand. I want to work on translation systems that make refusal as clear and accessible as agreement." The room was quiet for a beat. Then the program director smiled. "That is an excellent frame." I wrote it down later, because sometimes praise needs proof too. In one workshop, we practiced live interpretation with deliberately messy scenarios. A doctor speaking too fast. A family interrupting. A patient using slang. A form with no direct equivalent. I made mistakes. Everyone did. The instructor corrected us without cruelty. Each correction felt like stepping onto solid ground. This was what Vivian had tried to steal. Not the glamour of fluency, but the right to be imperfect while actually learning. A month before departure, the university held a small reception for fellowship recipients. I nearly skipped it because receptions are where powerful people drink sparkling water and congratulate themselves for noticing students they previously ignored. My mother insisted I go. "Wear the blue dress," she said. "The one that makes you stand straight." So I did. The event was in the East Wing Language Lab, the one funded by the Chiao family because irony has a scheduling department. Posters displayed student projects. Donors shook hands. Professors wore name tags despite being famous only inside buildings they controlled. I stood beside my poster on community vaccination translation and answered polite questions. Then Mrs. Chiao entered. The room did not stop, but a ripple moved through it. She wore white again. Vivian was not with her. Professor Harlan stiffened near the refreshments. Helen Park, who attended as board representative, noticed and drifted closer to my poster with the subtlety of a guard dog in pearls. Mrs. Chiao approached me holding a glass of water. "Ms. Reyes," she said. "Mrs. Chiao." Her smile was flawless. "Congratulations on your selection." "Thank you. I hope you understand that the situation with Vivian was painful for everyone. Consequences usually are." Helen Park coughed into her water. Mrs. Chiao's smile thinned. "You are very direct." "I'm practicing accuracy." For one dangerous second, I enjoyed myself too much. Mrs. Chiao leaned closer, lowering her voice below reception volume. "Vivian has withdrawn from Northbridge for the semester. She is recovering privately. I hope, as you move forward, you will avoid speaking publicly in ways that worsen her distress." There it was, the polished version of silence. Not a threat exactly. A request wrapped around reputation. In the first life, I would have promised. In this one, I considered the shape of my answer. I did not need to destroy Vivian at every party. I also did not need to protect the lie that had nearly destroyed me. "I won't gossip," I said. "I will tell the truth when asked." Mrs. Chiao's eyes hardened. Truth can be framed many ways. So can fraud. Helen Park stepped in before the temperature broke glass. "Mrs. Chiao, the board chair is looking for you." Mrs. Chiao held my gaze a moment longer, then turned away. Helen looked at my poster. "Good layout," she said. "Thank you. Also, stop poking tigers unless necessary." Was that necessary?
"No," she said.
But it was concise. I laughed before I could stop myself. Helen's mouth twitched. For the rest of the reception, I answered questions with my cheek unburned, My name on my work, and the East Wing lights shining above me with money from a family that could no longer buy my silence. The night before I flew out for the first training placement, I returned to the intersection where the first life ended. I told myself it was for closure, which sounded mature and literary. In reality, I wanted to see whether my body remembered the exact place. It did. The traffic light blinked red over wet asphalt, though the night was dry. Cars hissed past. A convenience store sign buzzed. People crossed without knowing a version of me had died there carrying someone else's thread in her pocket. I stood on the curb and felt fear crawl up my legs. Rebirth stories make second chances look clean, as if the past becomes a deleted draft. It does not. The body keeps footnotes. My phone buzzed, and for one wild second, I thought it would be the unknown number again. It was my mother. Don't forget passport. Also eat. I laughed shakily. Then another message arrived from an unfamiliar email address. No subject. I opened it.
I'm sorry.
That was all. No name, but I knew. Vivian. 2 words after 2 lifetimes of theft. Not enough. Not even close. But the strange thing was, I did not need more from her in that moment. I did not need confession, collapse, punishment, or a perfect apology shaped like the hole she left. I typed nothing back. Some messages are not doors. They are weather. They pass. The light changed. I crossed carefully, phone in my pocket, eyes up. Geneva was colder than the brochure suggested. The city looked elegant in a way that made even puddles seem regulated. My first placement was not glamorous.
No dramaticum species.
No cinematic rescue of misunderstood patients in marble halls. I spent 2 weeks in a crowded office helping review multilingual health guidance for displaced families. The coffee was terrible. The work was slow. The stakes were real. One afternoon, a senior translator named Samira handed me a document and said, "Tell me what is wrong with this." I read it and said, "The words are accurate, but the tone assumes the reader trusts the institution." Samira smiled. "Good. Accuracy is the floor, not the ceiling." I wrote that in my notebook under Helen's sentence and Mrs. Alvarez's words. My life had become a glossary of lessons I paid for in humiliation. During a training simulation, a participant froze mid-interpretation. She was from another university, brilliant on paper, shaking in practice. The instructor began to move on, but I saw the look on her face, the horror of a mind going blank in public. For a second, Vivian flashed in memory, seated before the panel, drowning in silence she had filled with my words. The old cruelty in me whispered, "Let people freeze." Then I raised my hand. "Can we pause and reset the scenario?" I asked. Maybe she can ask for repetition and continue from the last confirmed phrase. The participant looked at me with wet gratitude. She tried again. She recovered. That night, I wondered whether helping her made me weak. Then I understood the difference. I had not given her my script. I had given her a way back to her own voice. Months passed. The fellowship was hard in ways Vivian would have hated. It offered prestige from a distance and spreadsheets up close. I worked on consent language, emergency notices, interpreter training modules, and community feedback loops. I learned that institutions can harm people while staffed by individuals trying very hard not to. I learned that a badly translated phrase can delay treatment, frighten families, or turn a right into a rumor. I learned to sleep without checking whether someone had stolen my files, though I still used passwords Vivian would never guess because they were based on books she pretended to have read. My mother learned to video call without pointing the camera at her forehead. Mrs. Alvarez sent clinic updates and gossip about patients who asked whether our Maya had met the United Nations yet. Lydia sent one more apology, better than the first, because it did not ask for immediate forgiveness. I replied, "Thank you for saying this." Nothing more. Vivian did not write again. I heard through campus news that she transferred to a private program overseas after her suspension ended. Some said her mother arranged it. Some said she was starting fresh. Good for her, perhaps. Fresh starts are useful when people remember to stop carrying old knives. I did not follow her accounts. I did not search her name. There is a kind of revenge in refusing to become someone's audience. The real ending, if a life can have one while the person is still breathing, came a year later when I returned to Northbridge as a fellowship speaker. The university invited me to address new applicants about ethical communication in competitive programs. I nearly declined because the title alone sounded like the universe, making a joke at my expense. Then Mrs. Alvarez said, "Go. Tell them where the traps are." So I went. The lecture hall was full of students with bright eyes and expensive notebooks, anxious, ambitious, capable of kindness and harm in equal measure. I stood at the podium and saw, for one impossible second, the frosted interview doors superimposed over their faces. I did not tell them I had been reborn. Some truths become less useful when spoken literally. Instead, I told them a story about a student who confused being needed with being valued. I told them that helping someone prepare is generous, but becoming the hidden author of their success is dangerous for both people. I told them that translation is not a costume you wear to look compassionate. It is a promise that someone else's meaning will survive passing through your mouth. Then I paused. Pattern interruption number 6, quiet and deliberate. I closed my notes. The room looked up. And if someone asks you at the last minute to give them the words that belong to you, I said, understand that the interview has already begun. The first question is not from the panel. It is from your own life, asking whether you will abandon yourself again. After the talk, students lined up with questions. Some asked about fellowships. Some asked about language study. One girl waited until the line thinned, then approached with her phone clutched in both hands. She had tired eyes and a blazer too thin for the weather. "Can I ask something weird?" she said. "Yes." "My roommate wants me to rewrite her scholarship statement. Not edit. Rewrite. She says I'm better at sounding sincere." The sentence moved through me like an echo finding its original wall. "What do you want to do?" I asked. The girl looked down. "Say no. But she'll cry." I nodded. "She might. Then she'll tell everyone I'm selfish." "She might. So what do I say?" I took a sticky note from the podium and wrote one sentence. "I will give feedback on your own draft, but I will not write it for you." I handed it to her. She read it twice, then smiled as if the sentence were a key. "That sounds allowed." "It is." Her shoulders dropped. "Thank you." I watched her leave and felt something close to peace. Not because Vivian had fallen. Not because I had won. Because the pattern had broken somewhere beyond me. A sentence I learned through pain might save another girl from confusing usefulness with love. When I walked out of the lecture hall, rain was falling over the quad, soft and silver. For a second, the old fear returned, pavement and horn and red light. Then the campus bells rang, and the present reassembled itself around me. I was not in the first life. I was not outside the hearing room. I was not standing at the interview doors watching Vivian carry my voice inside. I was here, under my own umbrella, with my own name printed on the program, my own work folded in my bag, my own future no longer dependent on whether someone else could perform gratitude convincingly. My phone buzzed. A message from the fellowship director. "Excellent talk today. The students needed that." I smiled, then put the phone away without needing to screenshot the praise for proof. Across the quad, the east wing windows glowed. Somewhere inside, another nervous student was probably rehearsing lines about language as a bridge. Maybe they were sincere. Maybe not. That was no longer mine to control. I had learned the limit of my responsibility. I could translate meaning, not manufacture character. I could offer feedback, not become a mask. I could feel fear and still refuse. The rain tapped against the umbrella like quiet applause. I crossed the quad slowly, carefully, eyes up, and for the first time in 2 lives, the silence after the performance belonged to me.